What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the You Know Ball podcast. I am your host, Troll Bro Dude. And honestly, before we get into Underdog and all of the partnership sponsor stuff, I just want to say, if you listened to the episode earlier this week that we recorded, I finally admitted that the Sixers could win the title for the first time. And then immediately, James Harden might be hurt. I don't know. He looked terrible. I'm not necessarily buying that he's been hurt for 2 months, but they lose to the Chicago Bulls. Obviously, they come out and they smack them in the face last night. And then Embiid doesn't play the second half. So I don't really want to talk about that. I want to talk more about the fact that, I don't know if you guys know this. Sam, I think you do know this. Did you know that Eric Spoelstra's wife is 16 years younger than him?
Yes.
And that,
yes.
I just thought that discourse was really important to talk about at the top here.
That's pretty interesting. I think what we got to get into, if you want to talk about the Sixers, where's James Harden going? Will Joel Embiid be traded? What is this going on? Is what you really need to ask yourself is it normal for a basketball coach to meet his wife when she's 18 and dancing for the team? Is that a normal amount of time to be? And you have to have an opinion on this before we talk about the Sixers. Okay, this is just something.
Exactly.
Fair is fair. So write down your answers. If you want to talk about the Sixers, write down your answers. DM them to Trill. Trill's inbox is. Do not DM them to me. Trill is the one who wants them. So
sure, I have an open inbox.
Yeah, send him all of it. Put it in the Discord. Just don't send it to me. Send it to Trill.
Send your opinion, not on the Sixers, but on Eric Spoelstra and the gap between him and his wife in age. Now, look, for legal reasons, I do want to say they didn't go public with their relationship until she was 24. Just want to put that out there. She wasn't working for the team anymore. I'm sure there wasn't anything going on when she worked there, because that's a no-go. And then second, in addition to that, she's in her 30s now and he's in his 50s. So I'm going to leave that up to you. Those are just the objective facts about Eric Spoelstra and his wife. You can let me know whether you think that is normal, regular, all of that stuff.
Bear in mind, she was 0 years old and Eric Spoelstra was 16. That's a 0-year-old, someone who's not alive yet.
This is all in theory.
This is all in theory. In theory, you're talking about if you age it down, she is not alive and he is 16 years old. That is a incorporeal spirit, a soul not yet allocated to this mortal coil, dating a teenager. So maybe that's actually on her a little bit. That's a little weird when you're like an immortal soul. Anyway, I don't know. You've got to chime in, write in. Again, very important that you send this to Trill and not to me. But any thoughts you have on this, please, don't hold back.
All right. Thank you, Sam, for that. So now let's get into the part of the podcast that they pay us to do this, so we should do it.
I'm sure Undertalk is thrilled to
have that be the lead in.
Oh, luckily we've got a lot of good options tonight. We have 4 games that no one gives a fuck about. Let's be totally honest. No one cares about these games. However, this is kind of the best night for a daily fantasy night, though. Because,
it's true.
Yeah, all the teams are dog shit. Why not make it a little interesting?
Exactly.
Give yourself a rooting interest.
Yep.
Do you care about watching the Oklahoma City Thunder when the Rats and Presti might yank Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at any point in time? No, but you can get a 19.5 point higher or lower with Lou Dort. Points, rebounds, assists.
Yes.
So that's pretty impressive.
I do want to point out here, they are playing the Clippers, which we are going to talk about the Clippers up top. But this is obviously Shai's former team. There are a few things built into this. He's got a little bit of revenge on his mind. But there are 2 guys that I wanted to specifically target for the pick 'em on here for this game. Jalen Williams has been higher on the 9 rebounds and assists combined in 9 of his last 10 games. So feel pretty good about that 9.5 rebounds and assists. So I'm going to go higher on that as my first one.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously my guy, Isaiah Joe, who I am consistently reminded of. Thank you every time Isaiah Joe goes off. Thank you to Sixers fans. Thank you to Thunder fans. Thank you to everyone who just tags me in Isaiah Joe posts, just slowly twisting the knife in my spine.
At least you know you're right,
Yes, that's true.
I feel like the psychic damage would be worse if you hated a guy.
Yeah, it's true.
And he was exactly what you needed, and then he went somewhere else.
Yeah. Like Aaron Neesmith. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So Isaiah Joe 10.5. I'm going higher on that as well. He had 12 points against the Clippers the other night. He he only plays 18 minutes a game, but he certainly is incredibly efficient in those 18 minutes. So even we could just do these two picks. We could do Kawhi as well with Kawhi because we're going to talk about Paul George. Kawhi is going to really have to step it up in these next 2 to 3 weeks while Paul George is out. I wouldn't be shocked if we get, especially after Kawhi, not that Kawhi really cares about this shit because he's, a robot, but he did get kind of embarrassed the other night. Lou Dort locked him up on the final possession of the game. I wouldn't be shocked if we get a big Kawhi game tonight. First game without Paul George. Back after that kind of embarrassing game, he's got 30 points higher or lower on there. So let's look at his point total from the last few games because I'm interested to see. You never know with Kawhi. I am always afraid because it feels like it's kind of like the Joel Embiid thing where like if he gets a minor injury, like last night, they just pull him immediately, which does scare me. His last few games, so he scored 21 last game, 24 the game before, but then he scored 30, 38, 24, 34. So he's had some games higher than 30 recently. He's playing like 40 minutes a game. I don't know. I'm not sure. I might stay away from that one. I might just hang with these two here, or maybe Russell Westbrook. That's tempting because you know that someone's gonna have to step up in the absence of Paul George. Honestly, it might have to be Marcus Morris, which is crazy to say, but because of like Ty Lue seems to trust him a little bit. So fuck it. I know Clippers fans that are listening to this are probably throwing up in their mouth as I say this, but let's go higher on Marcus Morris's points, and I'll put $10 on that, and that's a $60 payout. Jaylen Williams higher than 9.5 rebounds and assists. Isaiah Joe 10.5 higher, and 10.5 higher for Marcus Morris as well. Use the promo code SLOT to get a $100 deposit match on Underdog Fantasy. You can also do drafts every single night on there. We did on the last episode, we did a draft for the playoffs, so you can start drafting for the playoffs right now. We're only 3 weeks away. So get up on there, get on Underdog, and then they're also doing a ton of cool shit for MLB opening day, which is also right around the corner. I know if you're a Phillies fan, you are probably very sad about Hoskins' injury today, but we move. So sign up for Underdog if you have not already. It supports the program, helps this thing keep going. So if you want us to keep the lights on, sign up using promo code SLOT. All right. So Sam, we do need to talk about the Clippers in actual detail now because Paul George the other night gets injured in that game. Did you see the injury?
No, I don't like watching bad injuries, so I kind of hid. I averted my eyes like a little bit.
Yeah, but I will say, and it wasn't one of those, obviously, like, I don't know if you remember the Louisville one with the guy years ago where it was like gruesome, but it didn't look good when it happened for sure. I was definitely a little bit concerned about Paul George in general after I saw the video and the picture, but they do come out a day later and they say, we're going to reevaluate in 2 to 3 weeks. Now, grain of salt there, because I was informed by Clayton Stevens, who listens to the podcast. He's a huge Clippers fan. He told me this is the same organization that said day to day when Kawhi had a torn ACL.
That's true.
So,
well, and I mean, you know what? I mean, he is technically day to day because, like, you can play like Rajon Rondo played in the same game that he tore his ACL. So, like,
true.
they're just being honest, right? Mm-hmm.
Carson Wentz scored on a 2-point conversion on a torn ACL. It's totally possible, and that didn't fuck up his career at all. He was totally fine after that, and he's,
yeah, he's normal now.
Yeah, he's the most normal you can be as a person. As Carson Wentz.
He's been a normal guy ever since then with a normal career.
Yeah, normal politics, normal everything.
Normal everything. Yeah,
exactly. So I've been thinking about the Clippers because obviously we've been kind of on the fence about them all year. How can you not be? Before the season, I believe we both picked them to get to the finals.
I think last time we talked about the Clippers, we had ringing. I jumped off with both feet last time we talked about them.
I did like a month ago.
I was just gonna say, I think you were off them before I was. So
yeah,
we've been out for a little bit here.
Certainly does not help with everything that has happened. Obviously, Paul George still, despite the fact that for some reason Paul George gets ridiculed a ton, still one of the best players in the NBA, still incredibly important to the Clippers and their championship hopes. Now we're staring down a situation where they're probably, even at the very least, they're going to have a tough first round matchup with a 3 or a 4 seed, or they're going to end up being in the play-in for the second straight year, missing one of their best players. Because they said 2 to 3 weeks for reevaluation, which, as we know with the LeBron shit, that doesn't mean that he's going to be back in 2 to 3 weeks. I think that probably means that they're going to see how he looks, and then if he's 80%, they might push it, because I think this is a huge year for the Clippers. I think that they'll be as cautious as they can possibly be. Maybe not in the same way as they are with Kawhi Leonard, but I think they're going to need Paul George to win even a single playoff series, unless we literally get like peak insane God level Kawhi with a ton of role players and the right matchup in the first round. I don't even think they win a playoff series now.
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds on that, because the thing is, the West is just not that good, and I think kind of one of the maddening things about the Clippers is how inconsistent they are, and if there's one thing the Clippers do have, it's depth. You know what I'm saying? You are losing your high level talent, but this is not going to gut the Clippers the same way, say you had a similar injury on the Phoenix Suns, for example, or
even Harden, with the Sixers.
Sixers. Most teams cannot, survive something like this. But you see with the Milwaukee Bucks, they have a pretty substantial amount of depth, and they mostly survived being without Chris Middleton for a long time. Now, obviously, the playoffs are a totally different thing. This is when you need your high-end players. You need everybody to be ready to go at that point. But I see, the thing is, I just don't really know, because, if you can scale up, Kawhi's usage, you do have a ready-made team around, it might not be I think them winning the championship has gone out the window, but I don't know if I feel tremendously different about them, being cooked in any given matchup. I still kind of feel the same way about them, in that they are probably not going to win the championship, but I also think they could win any series in the West, even without Paul George.
I tweeted today and I said, when you say every team is cooked in the West, you realize that really means no teams are cooked.
Yes.
Because the West is the great Midwest, and there is no way that you can really be out of it unless your absolute best player's out, or you just get, the worst possible matchup luck for whatever your matchup is in the first round. If the playoffs started today, it would be Suns Clippers. Yeah. I think KD is going to be back, and I think that the Suns would wipe the floor with them if Paul George was not healthy. Mm-hmm. But also, you might get a little bit of maneuvering from the Clippers now, where maybe they continue to win these games down the stretch, and they're trying to essentially control their own destiny. And then they can, in the last 2 games, if they're like, oh, we're too good and we're in the 5 seed, we have a bad matchup in the first round, let's tank to the 6 seed, see if we can get the Kings or the Grizzlies, or a team that we view as a better matchup for us, at least while we're missing Paul George. Because if Paul George was playing, I mean, I still think I'd take the Suns in that matchup if KD was healthy, but I definitely would. But I would definitely feel like the Clippers could compete with pretty much anyone, as you said before. What this comes down to me is where do they end up seeding wise? What does the matchup look like? Is Paul George out for the entire playoffs? Is he out for just the first round? Can they survive a matchup without him? It's possible. I certainly think that this changes their outlook in terms of they were very high on my blow it up rankings. Like, I felt as though if the Clippers didn't have a deep run into these playoffs, that was kind of it for this team. You know, it's 4 years. You've tried. You've had a bunch of different iterations of the team. You know, you have the Russell Westbrook iteration now. You've had a ton of different pieces around Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. They're both getting older. Maybe you try to trade Paul George after the year, but now you're looking at a situation where, one, you have a built-in excuse. Well, Paul George was hurt, just like Kawhi was hurt last year, and Kawhi was hurt the year before. So now you could say, maybe we'll try it one more time with a different coach or a different surrounding cast again, and we'll see if we can get some better injury luck and some matchup luck next year. And then if it doesn't work, then we'll blow it up. But I personally think that if Paul George's injury is more serious, which I still think that they're being a little bit like they have been in the past, the Sixers and the Clippers both do this, where they kind of don't really share the full story. You find out later it's more serious, all that kind of shit. And if that's the case and Paul George is hurt, then his trade value is going to go down because he's had so many injuries and you might not even be able to trade him. So I think this gives them a little bit more of a pathway, like a pathway to continuing to build around this team. But I still think that, like, I just don't really see a way that you can justify having Kawhi Leonard and Paul George as your two best players when one of them's just hurt every single year. Like, at a certain point, you just got to shake some shit up and see what else you can get, and hopefully build a different kind of team around Kawhi Leonard if they flame out once again, which it looks like they're going to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are going to briefly touch on this later, but I was listening to, I don't usually listen to the Ringer NBA show, but they had a whole thing. Their motif for this week was the 5 most dire situations in the NBA and like the 5 the 5 brightest for like 3 years from now. And I think I'm right about this. None of them said the Clippers, which was insane to me.
Yeah.
None of them had them in their like bottom 5, which was, yeah, just like wild to me because I think this is clearly like the biggest time bomb. There's the most money, the fewest assets, the stars that are the most hurt all the time. Like, it's a big payroll. I mean, I get that everyone thinks Steve Ballmer like is just going to keep paying for this team, but I don't know, man. Like, it's a lot of money to look at your, I think with tax, their payroll like ends up being like almost $500 million.
It's a lot of fucking money. It's like them and the Warriors are paying more money than fucking God right now.
Yeah, and like you can't keep doing that for like first round exits. Like I don't care how cool of a guy like Steve Ballmer is. Like I just think that the other shoe might drop here sooner rather than later. Will that be Paul George and Kawhi Leonard getting traded? Probably not, but it's going to be, it might be Ty Lue getting fired. It might be a bunch of these guys.
Lawrence Frank's going to lose his job, probably.
Yeah. Everyone's going to need to go. And I think that, I don't know. I just think that, do you death by 1,000 cuts sort of watch this team hoping that finally the health will be right? Because, in the Clippers defense, I at least did. I think you did too. Picked them to come out of the West before the year. And I guess there's something to that. Now, would I do that again next year? No, because I think this year was the year we finally got to see what it looks like when everybody's somewhat healthy.
Sure.
And it didn't look that overwhelming. I'm not going to lie. I thought the Clippers were going to win like 55 games and like look like gangbusters this year. They don't. And I don't see any avenues to improvement for them. So like, I'm sorry, but I think they've got to. If I were them, I would trade while the trading is good.
Yeah.
I guess is what I would say. I would
get out ahead of it 1 year early instead of 1 year late, and then it's caught. I tend to agree with you on that.
Yeah,
I do say I won't pick the Clippers again, but I also am an idiot because a year ago I picked the Nuggets and Nets to get to the finals, despite not knowing about Jamal Murray's health and despite not knowing about the Kyrie Irving situation. And I was like, yeah, we'll be fine. And then it wasn't fine. And then a year later, we're in the same situation with the Clippers. And I picked them to go to the finals. And then I think it's probably been about 2 months since I backed off that. I didn't think Kawhi was quite Kawhi, even though he's actually gotten back to a level where he's pretty much all the way back, I would say. Yeah. It happens to come at a time that now Paul George is out and things just aren't really ever going to align for this team, it seems. And I had some thoughts here. I had some things written down. I definitely think that I'm trying to figure out, they're like a combination of the unluckiest franchise of all time, the Clippers curse thing that we constantly talk about.
Right.
And then just decades of incompetence before that. So like some of these things are just like not really luck, but like the history of the Clippers is pretty incredible. Going back to the 1970s to 1990, so 1977 to 1992, they had the second which was the longest playoff drought in the history of the NBA until the Kings broke it last year. So the Kings broke it with 17 straight playoffs miss. The Clippers have had 16 straight miss between 1977 and 1992. They also had 8 straight that they had missed from 1998 to 2006. So they've had 2 of the longest playoff drought streaks ever. That's the incompetence that we're talking about here. Yeah. In the middle of all of this, probably the most infamous pick that they've ever made was Michael McCandy, number 1, 1998 NBA draft, which is kind of just shows you how terrible the Clippers were run at the time. It was a pick that even in retrospect, even at the time, people were like, do you know how old Michael McCandy was when he was drafted?
I don't. When was it? What was it?
I'm fairly certain he was 24 years old. Coming from Pacific University was the school that he went to.
Yes, he was a senior at yes, he was a senior at Pacific University, and I'm doing my math here. I think you're right. I think he was 24 on DraftNet.
He was 23. 23. I just did the math real quick because it was the 1998 draft. He was born in 1975. He was 23 years old.
He did a season with Kinder Bologna in the Euro League before playing in the NBA.
I didn't even know that. So so he had a year abroad. He played 4 years in college, and then he gets drafted number 1 in the 1998 NBA draft, which,
sorry, I've got to correct myself. That was actually because of the lockout. That he signed there. Okay, so never mind. I got that wrong. I just saw that he had played there that year, but it was a lockout thing where he signed and played a few games before the lockout was resolved.
But regardless, at the time, people thought that the pick was weird because of his age. Because and I'm not like you can't draft older guys, but if a guy's 23, you probably don't want to take him with the number 1 overall pick unless he was destroying the NCAA in a way like we've never seen before, or the Euro League. So he was the number 1 pick. The number 2 pick, Mike Bibby, went on to have a nice career. Rafe LaFrentz was the 3rd pick, also had a nice career. Antoine Jameson made multiple All-Star teams. Vince Carter, a little bit later than that, you had Dirk Nowitzki and Paul Pierce to round out the top 10. So, in retrospect,
weren't like Larry Hughes and Tractor Trailer in there too?
Yep, they were both in the top 10.
And I know Tractor Trailer isn't lighting anybody's world on fire, neither is Larry Hughes, but those guys are like NBA players,
So is Jason Williams. White Chocolate was also
another guy.
Yeah. So they had, there was a number of actual NBA players. They pretty much are the only ones that didn't get a guy in that draft, is what I'm trying to say.
That's actually like a pretty good top 10 as far as draft. Like 2 Hall of Famers, 3 Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
And then like all NBA guys, like a lot of guys who like had pretty successful careers. Like
Bonzi Wells was a good role player. Like
a lot of these guys were high level starters. Like they
end up with Michael McCandy when they get the number 1 overall pick. Like that is like one of the worst number 1 overall picks by a wide margin, and it's really hard to miss on a number 1 overall pick unless you are literally stacked like the Sixers in the process, and they were able to overcome that and have some success after that, despite the fact that they whiffed on, let's say, 1.5 number 1 picks. They have made the conference finals exactly 1 time, and that was the year that Kawhi gets hurt. That was the only time they've made the conference finals ever, which is crazy. So that speaks to incompetence. That also speaks to bad luck. Kawhi gets hurt that year.
Yep.
They had the Lob City era where you had 3 collapses. Yep. The 3-1 in the bubble. You also had famously the Game 7 where I believe it was Corey Brewer and Josh Smith for the Houston Rockets went off and scored a ton of points. I think James Harden was on the bench for the Rockets and they won that Game 7.
Yeah.
The OKC collapse that Chris Paul had at the end of the 1 game. Blake Griffin's injury the 1 year. They basically have had shitty luck with injuries, horrible collapses. I think that there really isn't any sort of competition. Like the Sixers, we've had a lot of bad shit happen with the Sixers. But the Sixers also, in the midst of all this, drafted Joel Embiid, actually did a lot of good things, had some success. People will bring up there's a litany of things that the Sixers had go wrong. But
anytime you lose to the team that ends up being the NBA champion on a like freak last second shot, like you were in the mix. That you know what I'm saying? Like that is like an ultimate. Like, do you think the Sixers like would have performed the same way against like the Bucks and the the Warriors that year? Like, who knows? But like, they were that you guys have at least been. I know everyone talks shit about the Sixers never making it out of the second round, but like, just dropping kayfabe, they were clearly had the talent to be there. That was that series was a coin flip series.
And also, I just want to say, this is one stretch for the Sixers franchise. They've won a title. They've been back to the finals since. They've done things throughout their franchise. This has been the Clippers' entire history. This is not just a weird 10-year period, a weird 5-year period. This is 12 years ago, they trade they trade what will become the number 1 overall pick for a wash Baron Davis. It becomes Kyrie Irving. Imagine Kyrie Irving with Blake Griffin, and they could still have traded for Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan. But because they jumped all the way up, and the Cavs get the pick, they jump all the way up in the lottery. Bad luck. Kyrie, some of that is incompetence. Some of it is bad luck. The SGA trade, another one where it's like.
Could we talk about that?
Yeah.
Because Zach, I don't know who in the Clippers refused to give Zach a quote or something like that, but Zach has been like on the warpath with the Clippers for like 2 years now. Like, I think that there's like something personal going on there. Yeah. Like he goes out of his way to like shit on the Clippers, which is like pretty rare for him. And he brings up this story about the smart NBA person he talked to, who in hushed tones the night that trade happened said they had to do it. It could go down as one of the worst trades. Shut the fuck up. I'm sorry. Shut the fuck up. Like, if you're not going to have the balls to say that the night it happens, I'm sorry. You don't get to talk. You don't get to do this now that it hasn't worked out. Now that we've been through, what has it been? 4 years? 5 years?
It's been 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
So you've seen all of the possible high points. You don't get to come in now and say, yeah, I didn't really like the trade. Like when SGA is turning into like a fifth in MVP voting guy. You know what I'm saying? Like SGA was good. You make that trade 1 billion times out of 1 billion times. This is that it's essentially the trade that the Cavs just made for Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah.
Albeit with the injury risks, which is clearly a huge difference.
Of course.
But everyone is talking about what a slam dunk that is for the Cavs. You were getting a more proven NBA player in that Paul George trade than Donovan Mitchell, I would say. Do you think that's fair to say? Like,
yeah, I mean,
like a guy who's been in more wars, like has been a number one option in winning second round playoff series, like
finals, multiple
conference finals. Like he's been all this shit.
He was coming off being third in MVP voting that year.
Yes,
by the way.
Exactly.
Which I think a lot of people do forget because Paul George had a few bad playoffs,
right?
But was third in MVP voting when the Clippers traded for him. That was 2018, 2019.
And so, I get, and also Kawhi Leonard is coming off of literally his greatest season ever, winning the fucking finals and
dragging a team to the finals. Essentially, Kawhi Leonard shot 41 times in that game 7 that we always talk about. He was the only one that was willing to shoot. He was the only one that was able to make a shot in that game when it mattered. Coming off of his best, playoff run that we've ever seen. And that player wants to come play for your team and says, go get me this guy who just finished third in MVP. Yeah. You go get the guy who finished third in MVP.
I'm sorry, the idea, because I get that guy is saying they had to do it. Yeah. But the fact that you're saying, oh, there's real fucking downside here. No shit. That is the game. I just think that is such an asinine, fucking. You don't tell that story unless you're trying to embarrass someone in the franchise. I feel I don't know. I get the impression that is. I guess what I'm saying is right now the reality we're living in is a bottom 3 percentile outcome for this Clippers era.
Yeah.
Could things have gone worse for the Clippers during this era?
It really feels as though, other than the fact that they made the conference finals for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Seems like a big deal. I don't know. You've never made the conference finals before. Other than that, I mean, yeah, the collapse in the bubble, the Kawhi injury, both, I mean, it affecting 2 seasons. Yeah. Now Paul George is hurt. And look, all these things were, as you said, that's part of the risk that you make when you make this trade. But on the whole, I'm still fine with the way that they did it. Mm-hmm. I think you're living in a fantasy world if you think, because I hear people say this regularly, you could have just convinced Kawhi to keep SGA. You could have told him, look, we have all these people. First off, when are you convincing Kawhi Leonard anything? We don't know anything.
Won the title and left.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We don't know anything about this guy. Exactly. He seems to be the most stoic man that has ever lived. Yeah. So if that's the case, I'm not sure you were convincing him of shit. And he might have said, hey, by the way, I'm going to go across the hall and sign with the Lakers, which was the other part that people leave out pretty frequently, that the only other team that had a realistic path to acquiring him was your arch rival who have made a fool of you for decades on decades. And, I understand. I think that a lot of this is bad luck. I think some of it is they took a big risk and it might not end up paying off as it seems right now. Who knows? But it certainly doesn't seem that way. Also, it is 100% retrospect bullshit that you thought that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would be this player. Because I know people who were huge Shai fans.
I was a huge shit. We talked about it before coming into the season when we did the trade value, and I kept pushing.
This was almost a year ago at this point when we recorded that podcast.
Yeah, and I kept pushing, and I said I think he's going to be amazing, and I think I wanted to put him at well, this is what I'm saying. I think I wanted to put him at 17, and that was
crazy.
Yeah, and now he's gonna get MVP voting votes, I think.
I'm talking about Clippers fans back then and draft people back then that were high on Shai that never saw him becoming an MVP candidate. That is where this whole conversation gets a little bit lost. And I talked about how it sucks a lot on the one podcast we did where, obviously they have Jalen Williams, who they got with the Clippers pick, who's awesome too. They have SGA, and it could go down as a really bad trade. Honestly, it probably will. Right. But the outcome couldn't be any better for OKC as bad as it is in terms of for the Clippers. The idea that we all knew Shea was going to become an MVP candidate, and they were also going to nail a late lottery pick and get a potential future All-Star is just not accurate. It's the risk you take, but it's not what we saw. We thought that the damage was going to be done 3 to 4 years from now when they're sending out picks in 2026 that are unprotected.
Yeah. Honestly, it kind of echoes the Nets trade a little bit in that way, where it's honestly, they're probably the most damaging picks are going to be the ones in the middle, and then you're going to kind of fix some things by the time you get back to, your other picks on the other end. But I guess that's what just drives me insane, is everyone's acting like this was some foolish this was not that Kings trade where they traded firsts for Jason Thompson and fucking Carl Landry or whatever it was. This is they really gave themselves a chance to win and really win. This wasn't even the Nets trade where the Nets were never beating the Heat ever. Where they were just kind of trying to see how high in the conference they could get. This was a team that really could have, with some health luck, had a chance to win the finals. You can't tell me that Lakers squad won the finals and this Clippers team couldn't have if they were healthy.
Yeah, and it's the same reason why I defend the James Harden trade to the Nets too, because I think they put themselves in position and just got bad luck.
Yeah. Just a insane black swan event, ruins. I mean, that's the thing with luck in the NBA. And I think we've seen a lot of that stuff come up, and it kind of, that's where we get into what I feel when the myth making on all of these teams, that's where we end up in our conversations we did, or I did last week, where you start just calling every title Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can see all the other timelines. We're a team that is hype that we're pretty sure would be better would be playing them, the full strength Nets probably do beat the Bucks that year. I feel that's not controversial.
And the full strength Clippers definitely beat the Suns that year.
Yes.
I think so. That's kind of how I feel about a lot of the outcomes of this. Now, we might want to shift the conversation to, is it really worth it to give up all this shit for a star unless you're getting a star that's a Donovan Mitchell squarely middle of their prime young guy that doesn't have a bunch of health question marks? That might be where we want to shift the conversation, because AD had the health question marks, PG had the health question marks, Harden had the age question marks. Yeah. There are legitimate convos to have. But it feels as though the Clippers always end up being, it's just kind of, once again, bad luck. And by the way, this is where we're going to wrap it up and go into the Patreon section of the podcast. But just one last thing here. They also had the shittiest owner in the history of the NBA.
Literally a guy who got kicked out for being shitty. Sarver also got kicked out for being shitty, but he
had to willingly do that, and it was
Well, somebody had to break the seal. I feel there was a higher level of difficulty, and we're talking about. God, that's Sterling. Have you ever seen that? You have to have seen that, the affidavit of Sterling being deposed, and he's just telling this really long, gross story about getting a blowjob. Yes. And his lawyer says, "Mr. Sterling, the question was," it's something totally unrelated. It's awesome. It's so sick.
He's such a fucking scumbag.
You know what's also awesome about that is if you go back and you read that affidavit, you learn rich guy language because he's talking like Trump. That's exactly the same thing. It's the old gross shitty real estate guy.
Yeah.
They all talk the exact same way.
Yeah, exactly. Jesus Christ. The ultimate fucking scum lords. All right. So if you want to hear the rest of this podcast, we're also going to talk about Jaylen Brown's future with the Celtics after a few articles came out interviewing him that had some weird quotes in there. We're also going to talk a little bit about that Ringer NBA podcast that Sam had mentioned with the future power rankings. And then we're going to draft the best playoff matchup, similar to the finals one that we did. But this time we're just going to do matchups that we want to see in the Eastern Conference and in the Western Conference. So link is in the description for that. Sign up for the You Know Ball Patreon. If you want to hear this episode, I'm sure it's going to be like 2 hours long. So check it out.
Yes.